welcome back to A Peculiar Project. I'm Fritza Roberts. I wanted to enter into the discussion about American Dirt and Jeanine Cummins' story. I am here to talk about the controversy over American Dirt by Jeanine Cummins. And yes, I do walk around with my hair like this, holy cow. So I'm not entirely sure where to start, but I know I have to do some sort of response to this because it is a big deal to my friends in my writing group. I'm struggling myself with how to answer that. This is out of control. I'm sorry. Give me a second. We're gonna go like this. Okay. I have a lot to say, and I'm not sure how coherent I will be. I'm just recording this kind of by the seat of my pants. But this has come up a lot in my writing group, and because I give a workshop on writing the other without offending at writing conferences, people are looking to me to make sense of this. There has been another situation within Romance Writers of America. I will do some research and digging. I don't really read romance very much. I'm not really a part of that world, but I will look into what's going on there and do a video on that soon, just to see like what kind of advice we can get out of that situation as well as writers. And I will say, first of all, that I have not had a chance to read American Dirt. I'm debating whether or not I will. I think if I do, it will be a library borrow and not a purchase. Also, I will say up front that although my spouse is an immigrant, it is very different circumstances. He is from Italy and not Mexico or Latin America. So that's a very different story. So while immigration issues are something I pay attention to and follow very closely in this country, it barely applies here. So let's dive in. So from what I have heard, there are two problems with this book that are being surfaced now. One is the idea that this story is not Jeanine Cummins' story to tell, that she is making money off of marginalized people, off of the pain and suffering of other people. And another issue that I've seen come up recently is that it's possible that well, it's not exactly plagiarism, but some parts of the story were lifted from other authors who are genuine Latinx authors. So we have a whole lot to unpack here. And where do we start? Some of the things that I have heard said in writing group is that the people are scared. Writers are scared because we are hearing somebody even used the word censorship. So is the writing community's response censorship? Is the publishing community's response going to lead to censorship? We'll talk about that too. So first of all, when I give my workshop on writing the other without offending, one of the first things I discuss is privilege, acknowledging our own privilege, and approaching writing the other with a sense of humility and respect. It is absolutely crucial when you write people who are different from yourself, especially if they are individuals within a marginalized community or who are oppressed in any way or who are extremely different from yourself, let's say, that you approach this subject with humility and respect. That is absolutely crucial. And to do this requires a certain amount of introspection and self-work. You cannot have humility and respect for others if you don't know yourself and if you don't acknowledge your own privilege. So starting from that, what do we have to say about Jeanine Cummins? Well, first of all, she has self-identified as white and sometimes Latinx, is the gender neutral way of saying that. So if you're not aware, Latinx is how we pronounce it. It's how it's spelled. You just replace the O or the A at the end with an X. And that's just to have a gender neutral term to refer to a group of people or to refer to intergendered or intersex people of the Latinx community. So there's a whole lot right there in that sentence, and we will maybe discuss that kind of thing later. But the gist is that Jeanine Cummins has self-identified as white. She's, I believe, mixed race. She has a grandmother who's Puerto Rican. So a grandmother. So she has not herself experienced immigration. But it seems that this is a topic that she cared about. And I do think, I will say in her defense, that she has said that this is an issue she cares about, that this is something that she wanted to bring to the forefront of American discussion, the humanity of what is happening when people are crossing our southern border. And that is important. I think to acknowledge that her intention was to show humanity of the people crossing the southern border of the United States. Um, did she do a good job of that? Well, I don't know. I haven't read the book and I'm not from Mexico. So I'm not the best judge of that. But what I have seen from people who are Mexican, especially, and Latinx in general, is that she picked odd characters to represent immigrants to the US. That apparently the woman who immigrates with her son is basically middle class and almost by American standards, I mean United States standards rather than Mexican standards. So that's a very odd thing to choose. Um, Partially because someone with that status probably has a better chance of immigrating easily and legally through work visas or simpler channels than simply illegally crossing the border, dangerously crossing the border. Now you're running for your life. That certainly changes things. However, other aspects of the story that I have read about imply that if one of the uh, if one of the gang leaders is wooing her, then is her life in danger? I mean, her husband was killed and his family was killed. I don't remember, I don't know all the details, but the depiction of life in Mexico seems to be um, idealized and a little bit off, according to what I have read from other Latinx authors, and just sort of a odd, sensationalized choice of main character. So the majority of people who illegally cross the border do so because they have nowhere else to go and they have no other resources and they don't know what else to do. And that's a very different situation from owning a store and having some money, even some money. Um, so understanding that maybe some of her choices weren't the most sensitive um, is a place to start. Did she make gross generalities or stereotypes? It doesn't sound like it. So it almost sounds like she did the opposite and picked people that were too special to really fit the scenario. I can't be the judge of that. And like I said, I haven't read the book. So maybe I will, and maybe I'll do another review of the book after I read it. Um, Another thing that people are saying is that she cribbed parts of her story from other Latinx authors. And this is much more problematic to me as a writer. So, uh, a question I asked my writing group, who are very much defending Jeanine without having read the book, but just like defending her as you would de facto defend other writers, is sort of what I'm getting from some people. Um, the thing is, we had a young woman writing a very personal memoir that involved infidelity and drug abuse and just insecurity. And I don't know about any I don't want to use any clinical terms, but it seemed like there was just some emotional instability that she was experiencing as a young teen and young woman, and she eventually straightened herself out and had a coming to God moment and wanted to share that story. Um, it's an intense read. It's really interesting. But so I posed to my writing group, we haven't seen this young woman in maybe a year, and we all hope she's doing well and we want to hear the end of her story. But what I posed to my writing group is, so I don't know her personally, other than that she came to writing group for a few months and then now has left. But what if I decide that that's a really interesting story and I'm going to fictionalize it? And I'm going to clean it up and make it a little sexier for publishing, and make it a little more dramatic, and make it on the one hand easier to stomach, and on the one hand more dramatic, right? A bigger turnaround in character, maybe. Um, is that cool? Is that cool to lift somebody else's story and rewrite it? I mean, even if I did all of the research on all of the issues that come up, say there's teen pregnancy or whatever it is, say I did all of the research, all of the due diligence, maybe I experienced one of the many factors that came up in that story. Is that enough? And I do all of the work of writing all of the words to fictionalize this story. Is that okay? Is it okay for me to write that story? I don't think so. I would not be comfortable doing that. And I get it that as writers, we look around us at the people we know to use character details, to see how people behave, and interact with each other. But that would be more than just lifting a few character traits and the way people approach problems. You know, if hypothetically, her way of approaching problems is to run and seek solitude elsewhere, you can use that as a character trait. But you cannot tell her story because I didn't live that story. And that would be exploiting her pain and suffering for me to make money. Say I got $1 million advance for that. Is that ethical? That's the question. It's legal. I did all the writing. I didn't infringe any copyright. But is that okay? If you were in my writing group and I had done that, would you want me to come back to writing group? Would you be comfortable sharing your stories with someone like that? So while Jeanine Cummins lifted details of stories from other authors who were already published, and we can track that, if I had done that to someone in my writing group and she never published that story, it might never be known. So these are the fine lines that we're talking about when we ask, is it your story to tell? And the heat just came on, so I hope that doesn't affect the audio of this video. We have forced air and it's just brrr. So when you're asking as an author, is this my story to tell? These are the kind of situations you have to think about of like, how personal a story is it? Is the person you're writing about marginalized? Is this a highly politicized issue right now? Are you going to be seen as just writing the coattails of a highly politicized issue? I mean, the border wall is in the news all the time, and here comes this book. Yes, she was doing research for the past few years, probably. I don't know how fast a writer she is. I'm not fast, but this issue has been going on for 4 years. It's very easy to see that this issue came up in the news and she said, huh, I really care about that. I'm going to go do some research and write a story about this. And on the one hand, yeah, you're bringing the question to light. On the other hand, though, we're not talking about the issues of the border wall and border crossing and immigration to the U.S. Now we're talking about the issues of who gets to tell stories and publishing, which, while to writers is a really big deal, is it the biggest moral question to be asking as ourselves as Americans? I'll just pose that to you guys. So we have two different issues here. One is like, is this my story to tell? And the other is the borrowing of other people's stories. And like I said, it's a really tricky subject matter to approach. It's one of those, you know it when you see it. Did you do wrong? Well, if other people say you did, then you should be apologizing. Unfortunately, sometimes people don't realize that they're crossing a line until they already have, and it's kind of kicking them in the butt. But how hard is she being kicked when she's already got $1 million in the bank? I don't think she's been asked to send that back, and they're going to retract the book. So the final question is censorship. And is she being told, is anyone being told, you can't write that? No. No. You can write whatever you want. She wrote what she wanted, and she got what she wanted to a certain extent. Although I don't know that she really wanted this much backlash. But, um, you know, the thing is, first of all, let's go to the publishing industry. Did they learn a lesson? Are they really not going to do this again? There has been talk about how they're going to vet authors better and make sure that it really is own voices, authentic authors telling their own story. Sure, sure, sure. Bullshit. Bullshit. Come on. If they gave her $1 million advance, they knew this book was going to make bank for them. Bank. And the more controversy there is, the more money they're going to make, the more people are going to read it and talk about it and defend her or vilify her. That book is getting bought and sold a million times over. Millions upon millions. If they gave her $1 million advance, that means they expected to send in the tens of millions copies, more than that. Okay, so we're talking about publishers who knew they weren't taking a risk, that this was a highly sellable book, and it is selling. It's even if Oprah Winfrey somehow retracts putting it on her list, the decision's already been made. It's already there. People have already bought it in anticipation of it being on her list. So there's no real going back from that. Excuse me. And for the publishing industry to say, oh, we won't do it again, we're going to vet our authors better next time, not if they think they're going to make money. If they think they can pay someone $1 million, that means they think they're going to make at least 10 times that more in sales and profits. Also, my friends, I just looked up Jeanine Cummins on Amazon, and guess what? The publishers updated the covers of all of her previously published novels to state best-selling author of American Dirt right there on the front cover, and all of her book descriptions, best-selling author of American Dirt. Don't give me any bullshit about how they aren't capitalizing on this big time. So they would do it again. Come on. It's a business. Business is about money. So you follow the money and you see, that's nice. You follow the money and you see that, sure, they're doing lip service. And yeah, they might turn around and spend some of their profits on advances to other authors who might be more marginalized voices. And that's great. That really is great. And with publishing being an industry that isn't, I mean, they're making money. Let's not fool ourselves. But it's not the biggest industry in the world, right? So when you see a big sale like this and this kind of excitement drummed up over a book, that is good for publishing and for authors overall. What we can hope is that it is also good for authors of own voices, of marginalized voices, and especially of the Latinx community, because there's a long-standing tradition of literature in Latin America. And I would love to see some Latin American authors, Latin US authors, telling their real stories, really sharing what's going on today. Those are some authors that I've been trying to get on my to be read list. It's really hard. For me right now, I have a really limited budget. So while I want to be supporting and funding other authors, I'm I'm slacking. I feel bad, but that's another video. So, what is the takeaway from all of this if you are writing a story? Well, first of all, write your story. Write it. The only thing you can do as a writer is write your story and get it out there. Get it at least the first draft down. The next step is to sit back and think. And like I will go back to the beginning, sit back and think with a little bit of humility and ask yourself, am I coming from a place of privilege? And the truth is that most people who write are coming from some sort of privilege. We have the free time to write at the very least. And the expectation that at least it's a possibility for our dreams to come true, to become published authors. That is a state of privilege. So start by acknowledging that, by saying to myself, I'm lucky to have this life that I have. Even if you are a marginalized voice in other ways, I bet there are some ways in which we're privileged. Most of us have ways in which we are different and ways in which we are privileged, normal, whatever term you want to use. Well, normal privilege isn't normal, but in the U.S. it kind of is. Just a matter of living in the U.S. puts us in a privileged position. So let's just be honest about that, right? Let's take a look at that, at how the rest of the world lives compared to us. And sure, Europe kind of compares depending on the country, but taking a look at what you have to be grateful for, taking a look at things that you may have taken for granted, and taking a look at ways in which you may have inadvertently taken advantage. And I think that's really important because even just being male gives you an advantage in the publishing industry. So, I mean, we're seeing that being more normalized now between male and female, but then there's the queer community that is still marginalized. So, being even just perceived as straight, whether you are or not, being perceived that way gives you advantage. And it's subtle and it's unacknowledged and it's unintentional in a lot of places, but it is real. So, understanding that things that might be unintentional are still real advantages for many of us. That's a good starting place. And I urge you to take that step and look at yourself and look deep at your heart and say, I'm privileged and I probably have taken advantage. I know I have. I'm sure I have. We all have. That's part of being alive, and it doesn't make you evil, and it doesn't make you a bad person. But understanding that with privilege comes some responsibility to help elevate the people who don't have the same privileges, to help those voices to be heard. And we talk a lot in my writing group about giving back. People have helped support us. That writing group of mine is amazing and has really changed my writing and changed my perspective on the publishing industry. And I wouldn't be the same person without them. I am eternally grateful for pen writers, and especially Area 1, and especially the Fellowship of the Quill. Hey, shout out. But that alone, having access to that group is an astounding privilege that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't moved here by chance. So just taking a look at that and understanding that other people don't have all of the opportunity and privilege that you do. Just taking a moment quietly to acknowledge that is a great response. I got the hiccups. The next step is to look at your characters and look at your story. Like, how deep is your story? If you're writing an action adventure based on tropes and they're pretty well utilized but not cheesy, then go for it. If you're writing something that is really delving deep into an issue that doesn't impact you directly, then you need to think a little bit about how you portray that, how you portray yourself and your relationship to that issue. I'm not saying you don't do it. You do it. Writers need to do the hard work. I do believe that that's important. And I do believe it's important for all of us to write diversity into our books. We do not live in, for me, like an all white world. Not everybody around me is Irish. My own spouse is not. So you have to learn how to write other people and different people. Um, but doing it with sensitivity and grace and making sure that your characters are individuals, come off as individuals and not as stereotypes, is a really big first step. And if you are at all uncertain, then you pass your book through the hands of an editor or a beta reader or a sensitivity reader, someone who is familiar with these issues and how to address these questions of yours as an author so that you can avoid some of the backlash. And then, the other thing that I would say is Jeanine took a risk. I'm using her first name now because we're friends, because we're all writers. She took a risk and she wrote a book outside of her milieu, right? And she's facing some backlash. But if she did it for the right reasons, then I think she should still stand up straight and stand behind her work. Maybe she should hear the criticism and say, okay, I'll do better next time. But sometimes that's all you can do is apologize and do better next time. And that's okay. That's part of life too. We all are imperfect. We are. We have to be. That's part of being alive. It's part of the beauty of being alive, I think, as the imperfections and the projects to work on. So I guess I've rambled on for almost half an hour. Um, If you have any questions, put them in the comments down below. Please do subscribe and ring the bell. And I hope to see you all again soon. I hope I stop using all the time when I talk to you guys. I'm working on that. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this issue as well. Not so much on ripping on Jeanine Cummins, but in general on writing the other, how you approach it, what you avoid, how you decide if a story is yours to tell. For me, I guess I'll talk for a few minutes more. I just go ahead and write for the most part, but I do try to ground it in a place where I've lived and the people that I know lived there near me. So people who have lived in my communities and people I talk to. I try not to write people who are totally unlike me that I've never spoken to and I don't know anything about. So we will talk more about this quite a bit in the future. This is a topic that I'm very passionate about. So thank you for listening to me ramble on and on. I hope you will subscribe and ring the bell and come back. Until then, happy writing.